Creating a great video game is hard, and it's nothing like what you see in the movies.
Adios, turd nuggets.
Making a game that people find fun and rewarding is like building a house blindfolded. You might have a stellar blueprint and an A team, but the real magic happens only when you press play on the first build and make improvements and reiterate over and over and over again until you actually hate playing your game. And guess what? Making games for new technologies like XR, AI, and blockchain, you don't even have blueprints. It's completely uncharted territory. That's where Adrian Lacey, a gaming exec at Ubisoft, steps in. He's the creative force behind some of Ubisoft's biggest brands like Rabbids, Ghost Recon, and Just Dance. And now he's the go to for integrating new technologies into Ubisoft's most successful franchises. Adrian shares his secrets on game development for the Meta Quest and why it will be different than ever before. Friends, here's Adrian Lacey. Hey, Adrian, how's it going?
Wonderful. Lovely to see you, David.
Where are you right now?
Montpellier, South France, in the middle of a heat wave. So I'm in the cellar to try and stay cool and frosty for this wonderful interview.
That's fantastic. Thank you for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. Adrian, I never asked this from you, even though we worked together for a long time and we've known each other for decades. Please share the audience your origin story.
I worked before video games as we know it today. I guess the consoles and all that kind of stuff. I actually worked in arcades. I grew up in the UK. My later life, so I worked in pub slot machines that you might be aware of. The fruit machines that you get into pubs, bingo machines, or arcades with penny pushers, those kind of things. So that's the industry I sort of started in. That's how I sort of found this fascination of games. I did a lot of research. I actually started in market research, talking to different players way back when, why they play these kind of games and what they love about them. And you find this fascination of players. People like to play games. There's a joy and excitement that goes with it. And that kind of went along with my fandom of growing up with Nintendos and ColecoVision and all that kind of stuff. So I always wanted to make games. But the difference was in arcades back then, it was printed circuit boards. It was a little bit different. It was a little bit more mechanical. Like you had to press a button, you had mechanical reels. And I saw it was weird. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I was talking to someone about touchscreens. And when I started in slots, in coin op and mechanical slots, touchscreens were just coming out. Now, this is going back in like 1998, I think it was. And we had these like big, massive screens and touchscreens. You had to like virtually punch them to get them to work. So, I've seen the evolution of different technologies over time. And that's always led to my fascination of sort of video games and why I wanted to carry on in games, because it's always on that cutting edge.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in terms of gaming, people don't understand quarter gaming or even gaming that you would see in gambling type settings. Those are all the similar mechanics that we see in video games today. So that transition must have been pretty easy. But how did you end up at Ubisoft?
I've sort of been around. I was in distribution. I used to work with Hasbro Micropose way back when. I worked with a couple of French companies, developers. I worked for TDK when they started their gaming division in Luxembourg and in Germany. So I've done a lot of the different places around Europe over time, Paris and what have you. And I was actually living in Mexico City, of all places. I went back to Mexico to see family and stuff. And I was writing. I used to do a bit of writing, bit of freelance writing. And Headhunter phoned me up and they said, "Look, there's this job. And it's in the south of France." And I joked when I went to Mexico, I said, "I need sunshine and heat." That's what I actually said to them, and otherwise I wasn't interested. And she goes, it's in the sun, so you have to do the interview. And I was like, now I'm regretting it at 38 degrees. That'll teach me for what I be careful what you wish for. And so I said, okay, I'll do the interview. And a couple of people phoned me up from Ubisoft, gave me kind of an overview of what I'd be working on. They introduced me to two games. So the two games that I'd be working on was King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong with Michel Ancel way back when, and Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, which actually took place in Mexico City. So they phoned me up. One of the guys, one of the senior product managers and the head of the studios phoned me up, did the interview, and they're like, you're in Mexico. I can recognize the number. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in Mexico. And they're like, really? That's interesting. So they brought me over to Paris and they showed me, um, I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure about moving back to France and what have you. And they showed me the target game footage of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind. It was, I think, it was the next generation of consoles. It was HD. It was that sort of transition. It was like 2004, 2005. And they were like, what do you think? And I'm like, well, I was trying to negotiate a little bit, but I was like, yeah, I think I was literally chomping at the bit. And ironically enough, so they fortunately for me, they showed me that. I thought it was incredible. They hired me. I moved to Montpellier, and then they asked me to take the team back to Mexico City to do kind of a recon mission, take loads of photos so we could recreate Mexico City with the art director, JC, and one of the level designers back in the day. So we actually went around for like 4 or 5 days, and we took thousands upon thousands of photos of Mexico City. And if you look at Advanced Warfighter, all Zocalo Plaza and all the center of Mexico is true to, almost true to what Mexico City is in real life. So it was kind of one of the first times we had that authentic world building integrated into our productions in Next Generation, because we could do it. The power was there. And same with the lighting, actually. If you look at the lighting, the way the lighting was done within the game was very similar, very realistic to what Mexico lighting looks like. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Warfighter, Ghost Recon specifically in the Tom Clancy franchise really nailed realism. That was the whole value proposition of what the Tom Clancy franchise brought together. And it was also one of the earliest games that Ubisoft used a lot of photogrammetry to get that realism from buildings and such. That's really fascinating. Adrian, you have such an extensive experience in the game industry. Now that you see in 2023 the landscape changing, how do you see the landscape of XR gaming evolve over the years?
Well, I think, I think like anything, I think players change. There's an evolution with the player. If you look at sort of our generation, how we started, you'd buy a box game, you'd play the game, then you give it or you rent it or what have you. Now you've got all these different platforms, you've got subscription services. I think the way players are, they consume much in a way that's very non-linear. It's not like a day and date. It's they jump from game to game. There's a lot more, we live in a creator economy now. Every creator is born every second. There's a new creator every second. They're much more familiar with technology. They like sharing their experience. They like giving things to other people and showing things of what they've done and what have you. And you see that with the huge expansion of games like Roblox or Minecraft, or even the creative mode in Fortnite. So, the marketplace is very different for the player. It's much more of a sharing, and much more watchable. I mean, even just the watchability of games. We used to have to phone a hotline up to get a cheat code from Nintendo. There was some poor guy sat there, and you're kind of like, I'm on this level of Mario. Can you get me through this bit because I'm stuck? And that was, it was a phone number, and plus we had one of those like old rotary dial things, so it took you half an hour to get there. Now it's the players themselves that are. I was watching my son play Zelda, and while he's playing Zelda, he's watching a guy play Zelda, and then he's watching the older Zeldas just to compare how and I'm just like, what is going on? So I think the way our clients have evolved is phenomenal. It's transformed. Technology itself, I think, pixels to polygons, that's one side. I think we still live in this sort of kingdom of 3D emptiness to a certain extent. I think we're not quite there. There's still, that photorealistic thing is one thing, but at the end of the day, we're interactive entertainment. And I think that's the big evolution that will happen over the next 5 years, is the interactivity will increase, the digitalization of our world, if you see what I mean. And I think that's starting to happen. You see that with things like voxels. You see that with the involvement of sort of VR, AR, MR. There's so many something R's. These kind of things are happening more and more. And I think players are adapting. I think developers are adapting. I think we're learning as we go. But I think, the real evolution is how more interactivity can we give our players. Realism is one thing. I'm a little bit different because I make games like Rabbids or Just Dance and things like that. And although I love the photorealistic Ghost Recons and the Clancy, I've also made games like Valiant Hearts, which is a 2D World War One game that makes you cry. I don't believe it's the polygons that make you laugh or cry or feel something necessarily. It can help, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think that's what we learn in terms of this creator economy. And I think that's what's great about VR and the exchanging of presence. It changes everything. I think you did a lot of stuff in VR, so you know that. I mean, the first time I tried it, I cried. I think that's the first time I actually cried when they showed me Toy Box on, I think at a DK2 or something, and I was like, oh, it was when they first brought out the touches, and I was just like, oh my lordy me. I was like, what is this? So yeah, I think that's the evolution.
And with that evolution, do you think there are going to be new challenges game developers will face in creating what people perceive as AAA content for VR platforms, considering that compared to traditional consoles, there's already a market, there's already a support system. What are these challenges that game developers are now facing in this new platforms?
I think how do I explain this? I think VR. This is a very subjective opinion. It's not, it's just my feeling having gone through making a game for VR. There's challenges with motion gaming. We saw that first touch of motion gaming really come to fruition with the Wii. So I was very fortunate. I did a lot of stuff on the Wii in the time, so we saw how impactful movement and how that adds to your serotonin levels, your dopamine levels. That physical side is brilliant. It's good for you. It's good for your health. It's good for your brain. So that's a real positive element. What we learned, the team learned very quickly in VR is everything you thought about when you made a game, you need to stop thinking about it, throw it away, and start again like it's something different. I'll give you an example. UI, like the little maps in Call of Duty in the bottom left-hand corner on a shooter. That doesn't work in VR. You're in, simple as that. So everything has to be integrated into that virtual space. Also, the impact when you're in a virtual space, I was talking about that emptiness of 3D today. A lot of decoration in games, you can't touch it, you can't manipulate it, and you accept that. You walk in, you don't grab a light, you don't grab a glass, it's just a table, you can't move things. In VR, that bothers you. It bothers you a lot. Your brain's like, I don't get it. I don't like it. So we learned a lot about your hands, embodiment. Having your physical body was really important for people. The challenges of motion sickness. I think there's all these different things, and plus the power of the devices. It's frame rate. Really, VR is frame rate first. If the frame rate's not working, if it's low, it's dropping, it's uncomfortable for everyone. And you have to, there's attentions to it's a lot, we did a lot of experimentation with motion sickness, and it's not necessarily just one thing. It's lots of different little things that can accumulate. And you've got to it's just a different way of thinking, a different way of processing. It's a different way of working. A lot of teams struggle because they don't work in VR. We were very fortunate. All our editor, all our tools were in VR. We built a custom tech just for virtual reality. So we were at a huge advantage. It was uncomfortable at first, I won't lie, because things were a bit buggy in the beginning. I mean, there's a couple of times when people would like change orientation and we'd all be walking sideways. It's like, so you got to be a bit careful. But working in that space and editing in VR and playing in the maps was one of the critical elements. And I think mixed reality will allow that to be much easier for developers as well, because then you're not shut off. You can still work. You have your virtual desktop and you can still build maps in sort of 3D quite easily that are integrated into that space. And that's why the virtual desktop and things like that, I think, is that first real step to crossing over and jumping through the looking glass.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's all the little things that make a VR experience wonderful. When there's things like rate issues or lag, or even the uncomfort of the headset itself, that may cause motion sickness also in terms of the optics. When your brain is saying, hey, this is not exactly correct, you might have to throw up because you ate a poison mushroom. Those are all key factors to make sure that you have a great VR experience. But at the same time, you didn't have to worry about with traditional 2D screens. So I think that's also going to be an issue for why game developers don't want to jump in, is because they may themselves not be very comfortable in XR. It just kind of reminds me of a conversation that I had with someone who worked at Sony, who had his job was to convince game developers like Lucas Arts to say, hey, let's build a Star Wars game for Sony PSVR, or talking to other people of big blockbuster franchises, and he would get the response, well, I love some of your Sony IP, your first party IP. How come you're not investing those titles in XR? Do you hear a lot of those conversations a lot?
Yeah, I think there was the funny thing that I always found. I mean, I think people often forget in video games there was motion sickness when Doom was made. When we first started playing around with first-person shooters, people were getting dizzy, and I've played 2D games that made me feel sick. We all remember Mirror's Edge. We all remember things like that, and there's things you've still got to be careful on. And I think VR was different because I think I think the industry tried to jump it across to the mainstream too quickly. My instinct was, all of a sudden you had people who didn't play video games trying to play a video game in VR and then saying they felt sick. If I gave them an Assassin's Creed, or I gave them any other game, a pad, they wouldn't be able to play either. They'd be running into a wall. They wouldn't know how to jump. They wouldn't know how to do stuff. You know what I mean? They'd have the same problems. But people were so excited. They were like, oh, I want to try. And then they were like, just do it. I mean, I saw crazy things. I saw people who didn't play games put a VR headset rolling around on the floor rather than just take the headset because they couldn't do what they wanted to do. And I'm just like, what's going on? We really did see some strange things. And I think we're responsible for that. We tried to jump it into the mainstream too quickly. I think we had, even in terms of the way we created content, everyone was saying, we want to make games we want to port this game into VR, but it's not the same thing. You take the success of Clash of Clans today, we all know, and you see it today, but it was originally developed for iPad, if I'm not mistaken. Not for a mobile phone. It was done for an iPad, and it was everything. It was, they saw the tablets, and when they first started, they really wanted to make something for a tablet, and that's why it's so good, because it was focused on the platform that they were doing. I think it was Clash of Clans. Might have to correct me on that, but and I think that's the mistake a lot of the developers made. I think that's a lot of what the brands did as well. Is rather than trying to create something unique, maybe not as long. It was the same thing, is how long can we make it? Like an open world with all this stuff. Let's make a 12-hour game. And I'm like, you don't want to be in VR for 12 hours. You just don't. I mean, I've sat in VR for easily 15 hours. It's doable, but I don't want to do that every day. And I think I've looked, when you look at the content, YouTube's a great example. We went from TV shows to YouTube. Much shorter, sort of 4 or 5 minutes. And then you have sort of TikToks that's even shorter. It's like 1 minute or 2 minutes. So VR didn't do that. VR tried to take a copy paste of the gaming industry and then shove it into VR. I don't know if that was the wisest first step. Yeah, it was a great way to learn, but I think there's so many more opportunities in it, in terms of entertainment, in terms of experiences, and there's definitely stuff out there, but I think we should have just focused on those ones, the uniqueness of it first, before trying to just get big IPs and shove them on the platform, or look at the games that work. Super Hot, Beat Saber. They're unique to that platform. They use that I mean, Super Hot, I still play, and it was a PC game, but it just works in VR. It fits with you. You're empowered when you're in it. You're just everything's around you. It's just in VR. It's an amazing game. It was an amazing game on PC, but in VR it just clicks. And same with Beat Saber. Fitness. I do a lot of fitness stuff in VR, which is interesting. I don't mind it. It gets you going. You forget that you're doing it. It's interesting. I do hit the wall still a little bit because I never put the Guardian on. It's old habits.
Yeah, with XR fitness and training, it definitely motivates you, number one, because you're actually set in a real environment and
Yeah.
you're using your body physically in the game. And I think you nailed it. In terms of building games for XR, you really have to think about the platform at the end user. If you look at the top XR games today, they're, like you said, Super Hot, Beat Saber, those are the same games from 2 years ago, or even
Exactly.
more longer for that matter. And we haven't necessarily had content that really, like the gaming console industry, you're seeing cycles of new content come out every 2 to 3 years. But at the same time, we're still at that stage, at that early nascent stage of game developers just getting into the fray. Changing topics a little bit, the Apple Vision Pro has been announced. What do you think of that hardware? And how do you think that's also going to change how game developers will be thinking about building for XR?
I think for those who sort of worked early in VR, they recognized what the vision was. We often talked about spatial computing way back when. I think it was a really good move. I think they jumped it. They said it. They said, like, a spatial OS, and it's like, this is what it is. Is that 360? We live in a 3D world, yet we consume everything in 2D, and I think that's the big shift. We are literally going to jump into a 3D world again, full time with Vision Pro, and I think there's nothing to take. You can't take away from what Meta has done over the last few years in terms of their hardware, from a hardware perspective, from a price point, from just generally what they've done has been phenomenal. In that, from a DK1 to today, sometimes I'm like, okay, I know it's cost a bit, but still they've taken it very, very far. I mean, I put the Quest Pro on and I was like, all right, fair play. And from a cost point of view, if you look at sort of Quest 2, Quest 1, if you look at the price point, it's cheaper than a mobile. It's like, and there's a lot of hardware in that device, it's but Vision Pro, I think the hands, I'm a gamer, so I'm gonna miss the controllers. It goes again, but I know how important that's gonna be, and I know Apple, out of everyone, are gonna be able to do anything that's UI and UX better than anyone. It's their skill set. That's what they're good at. They know how to keep it fluid. They know how to keep it simple for people, super accessible. I think they were very smart opening up their platform to app developers, which is what they did. Even though I think way back when, Apple didn't really want to open up to app developers, but I think that's the right move. I think that's a smart, because everyone's always looking for that big breakthrough app, but sometimes it's about that small little thing that changes it for everyone. So I think that's going to be a break. They have the cameras. I think the cameras, and putting it as I remember seeing the video when they announced it. It's like they had it just on the table in the middle of the lounge. I mean, it's got like 12 cameras or something crazy. It's like people are just going to use it to, if you put it in the middle of your lounge, people will just use it to film, when you're sat around a table or whatever, and then you can actually go back in and spend time in that space. So I think building memories, entertaining memories will be interesting. I think Apple will find a way to integrate that into their ecosystem. I think Apple players, they've got, I think, 30% of the market. I think Apple ecosystem, people feel safe within it. I think that's a big change. I think the Apple users, because I'm in games, I tend to have to work on PC. My wife's all Apple, so we're divided in two in the house. All the house stuff's Apple, and all the work stuff for me is sort of PC and Android. What's interesting is I think from an entertainment point of view, from an ecosystem point of view, it's such a strong ecosystem, and people feel very comfortable sharing stuff within their platform, their Apple devices. They've all got a watch, they've all got a phone, they've all got a MacBook. So it's an easy transition. I think that's probably been the hardest bit for sort of Meta today. I think it's been the hardest point. They're kind of on everyone's devices from a software point of view, but they're not the hardware go-to for a mobile phone, for a watch, for anything like that. And I think that adds a friction point that's difficult. It's a difficult hurdle, which Apple will remove completely. So, and I like the eye things. I think that was a smart move. I like that. I don't know why, but I just like it. I think it's funny.
Well, with the multitude of cameras, it allows for better hand tracking, which
Absolutely.
you've noticed this when people are trying virtual reality, because they're so present in that experience, they believe that they can use the controllers just like their hands.
Mm,
And so again, those little things that make great XR experiences, they add up. And when you're not getting that full immersion of hand tracking, it takes you out of that immersion. And then it also penalizes the player because they feel like they've done something wrong. And then
absolutely.
psychologically, they're thinking, well, this is not a great experience. So it's not good for anybody. Now, switching gears, now since since we talked about the Apple Vision Pro, and we have uh, other technologies like Web3 and blockchain, which I know you're very familiar with, how do you think blockchain is going to intersect with the gaming world, and its potential to intersect with XR for the future?
I think again. I think it's. I'm fortunate that I kind of live in a world that's in the little bubble on the edge of the cusp of, of a ravine. Um, I think the public has a very different perception of blockchain. I think the public has a VR of all these things. I'm sort of immersed in it, and I don't look at it as in the short term. I look at it sort of 5 years, just because of the nature of how we work. We look at it 5 years, 10 years down the road. Um, to go back to what I said earlier about the creator economy, the digitalization of our world, the digitalization of brands, digital ownership. Um, that's how I see it being used, as a creator today. And, I had this weird, I work with blockchain, I know how it works and whatever. And I saw the backlash come in. But what I always try to explain to people is, why do you think there's a backlash? And I said, the reason you think there's a backlash is because rather than just slowly introducing it into certain ways and testing it and iterating on it until it's clean and feels good and works well, we thought, everyone on board, everyone jump in, push, 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 jump on, everyone put it on, everyone blockchain, NFTs. It was like, and you're like, and then the problem with that, people were jumping in something which they didn't really understand. Now, funnily enough, the younger people do understand it because they understand digital ownership. You talk to a 45, 50-year-old guy who doesn't play games or anything. He watches Fortnite, and the guy's buying skins. He's paying like €50 a month on skins. He's like, what's he doing? Does he own it? No. No, he doesn't own it. What about that? No, he doesn't own that either. What about that? No, doesn't own that. Not, can he take it out and use it somewhere else? No. And you're like, what? And you're like, and that's when you start to realize we're a comic book generation. Our parents used to laugh at us when we bought comic books, and we used to collect them and put them in little cases and say, one day these are going to be worth a fortune. Well, now they are. Yeah, but your parents used to think you were crazy and you were a big child. And I think that's how I see digital ownership. It's that there's a whole generation that we don't understand. And if you look at the average age within the creator economy, if you call it, or creators, they're on average about 10, 20 years old. 10 to 20 is their kind of age demographic. I think it hasn't arrived yet. I think it needs cleaning up. I think people are working through it. I think there's a lot of really smart people working through its usage and how it's going to develop and grow. I think generally it had to be a slower, more steady purpose, because now we're fighting the media bubble. It's like the metaverse. Everything's metaverse. It's like everything's this. We live in this 2-week cycle of blah, 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 and then we forget about it. What people don't see is that there's a lot of people who've been working on blockchain for 10, 15 years. And there's some very, very clever people working on blockchain. Same with different interactive metaverses and what have you, different types of software, security software. So I think it needs time. It needs to be cleaned to a certain extent, and you need to get rid of a bit of the noise and go back to the basics. It should, for the player, myself, my personal opinion, it should be seamless. I shouldn't have to think about a wallet, an NFT, this, that, whatever. I shouldn't have to think about it. I go into my ecosystem, I get what I get. I don't want the hassle. Once you add those friction points, and I think platforms like Apple, for example, if you look within their ecosystem and you look how they do iTunes, well, you rent music. You never thought you'd rent your CD, would you? You think you'd buy it, but you don't own it. You rent it. So, I think it's already all around us. It's just a puzzle that people still have to put together. And I think, again, it's about the creators. The creators deserve to have digital, or no, they deserve real value. They're the ones creating the content. I think Roblox has done a phenomenal job valuing their creators. I think they've done a phenomenal job. And I think that's going to be something that carries on. I think a lot of people have looked, before Roblox, people used to poo-poo it within the industry. They'd look at, it's not a real game. It's a bit blocky. People used to sort of look down at it. When you've got 60 million monthly active users, well, you need to pay attention to what they're doing. Maybe they're doing something right. And maybe they're looking at, and their players are very, very faithful to them, and they provide that content and manage their content within their platforms. And I think that's been a brilliant thing for us to see as developers. And I think that'll continue to expand out. I don't know if that answers your question, but so
It does. That was perfect. I think that led into my next question. Roblox, Fortnite, they've already built their own metaverses per se, but what we define as the metaverse is an input like glasses that allow you to experience these worlds, but also the interoperability to be able to jump in from Roblox to Fortnite to whatever other game. And I think blockchain at least enables that, because how are you going to keep a record of what you've earned and how that translates? And I think that's also the biggest hurdle for the metaverse to exist, is that it's not going to be a closed ecosystem. How do game developers then prepare for that interoperability? Or, hey, look, it's still too early in the game. We need to even figure out how the foundation works. What's your predictions on that?
I mean, that's a really tricky question, and it's a very technical question. The way I explain it, and this is, I'm not an engineer, so I'll probably get shut down by engineers trying to explain this. But if I look at, so every company has their own tech. Generally, they have, maybe it's a Unity or an Unreal, or we have proprietary engines. You can't just take stuff from this engine and put it in the other one. You just can't do it. Whether it's character animation, whether it's the way the terrain's generated, or the FX, whatever. There's a lot of things that are specific to each individual engine. It's not a copy paste. It's like you can't do it from one operating system to another. You can't do it. It's like a Microsoft Excel. You can't just chuck it into a Quark Express. It doesn't work. Quark Express is an old reference for those of you who are older. But I
can't believe you just dropped Quark Express. That's awesome.
I've been trying to get it into a sentence for years. So I think I think it's not as easy as people think. However, you look at how platforms are working. I think social platforms like VR chat, things like that are really interesting, because they try and make it as easy as possible as to bring in your avatars into their space. So I think defining ingredients that are interoperable is a bit easier, rather than hold worlds. So I think there's a first step there. And I think it's about the industry seeing what's a good idea, what's a bad idea. Today, that's why, do we want that? Is it something that everyone wants? Do I want to be able to take this and put it into a different game? I don't even know if people want to do it yet. People talk about they want to do it. So I think we have to find a couple of use cases where people can do it. And I think, Roblox is probably one of the ones that's showing that way in terms of brands, at least. They're showing how brands are integrated. Fortnite, of course, the same. Phenomenal job integrating brands and having that collective idea. So I think it's just going through those steps. And it's just a step-by-step process. And we'll see where it goes. I think technically we have to be aware that it's not as easy as it looks.
100%. But I love what you said regarding brands, because I think that's also the first use case, especially regarding Roblox or Fortnite, considering those brands are probably going to be there in both those platforms.
Absolutely.
Even like hardware stores, like Home Depot is getting into the Metaverse game. How do you translate those brand assets into different games? So I think that's right. I think no one's really articulated the way you did, and I think that's really on point.
Oh, maybe.
One thing
I
that I
mean,
think
oh,
is
sorry.
missing from XR development today. No, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna. You made me think of a really interesting point. Because you talked about brands, you brought it back to brands. So if you imagine what's the seamless metaverse of the future, and I think you talk about XR and that transition between the real and the virtual, that seamless transition between the two. I think when I'm in a shop in a game and I see something I want to buy and I click on it and it sends it to me through Amazon or whatever, I think that's when people will start to feel the metaverse as an easy transition between as a fluid transition. They won't even notice it. So if I don't know, I'm playing Just Dance or whatever, and I see the costume. I mean, we talked about this years ago, but the dancer's wearing her dancing outfit, and I want to buy it, and all of a sudden I just go click, and then all of a sudden it goes through Amazon, and then a day later, or nowadays, like this afternoon, I have that same outfit. That's when I start thinking that it starts to become quite seamless and interesting. Sorry, and that's where I think brands will really start to jump into that world, and they already are. I think they know that that's the folk. That's really cool. So sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, because that's what. No, that's 100% on point. I think also people who are going to be used to this is the consumer that are associating with brands that also appreciate digital ownership. So I really love that example. In terms of storytelling for XR, which you have a lot of experience in storytelling and immersive content, one thing that's missing is the actual motivations for players. I think we've got the camera and controls right, but we don't have the character right. If you look at Beat Saber, we also talked about Super Hot. The controls are there because you're actually doing these mechanics physically and they feel right. And there's also like different effects and transitions you can do with the camera to make it feel more believable. But we haven't worked on the character. And you would think that would be the first thing that can really be exploited in XR. Why hasn't that been done?
There's things I want to tell you, but I can't tell you. There's it has been done. We've done it. I've done it in prototypes and tests, and I've seen a lot of tests around it. There's a couple of complicated areas. There's the uncanny valley, the facial side of things. It's very complex to get that interaction, that strong connection, that realistic interaction with a human or similar human face. I think AI and how it's evolved over the last sort of 2 years and stuff is changing that very quickly. That the way facial animation works, the way little details, the changing of things that me and you, when it's hard over a video call, but in real life, we see how your skin pigmentation goes a bit red when you're embarrassed, or you may raise a little lip here or there or whatever. Because of the presence of VR, that's a times 10 of importance. And in video games, they don't have it. We don't. If you look at really, I mean, there's a couple. The closest to there are probably what's the game? Who did the TV series? I can't remember. But there's only a couple games that really do it at that level. Okay. in VR as well, you've got other triggers. Remember, in video games generally, there's a lot of shooting, there's a lot of combat, there's a lot of stuff like that. I think in VR, I can tell you, we did a thing where we were doing an assassination in VR. We did a prototype. So you came up behind someone, you grabbed them, you had full body IK, the body was moving, you grabbed a knife and you stabbed them. When we did it, we all went, oh, didn't feel comfortable at all. we had neck snap, and we were like, whoa, that. So there's that side of things that we often don't talk about. It's very personal. You're in a very personal space. So things that traditionally in video games, I call it the Rambo effect. In Rambo, he kills like 700 people with a machine gun, and no one cares. But if you kill a dog, everyone's like, "How could you kill a dog?" So I think the stories that we've seen in VR, because they've looked at it from a pure gaming perspective and a gaming character perspective, rather than an emotional journey. There's been a few examples, but I think they should have started there. That's my personal opinion. I would have done it a little bit differently in terms of storytelling. And I think there's still a lot of opportunity to do emotional storytelling. I'll give you one example that I thought was a really strong example of a story to tell in VR. And hopefully someone will do it, because I didn't get to do it. So this is my story. We said, look, if someone was wearing a bomb vest, okay, if there was just an innocent woman or man or whatever, just sat there, and your job was to defuse that bomb vest on them, right, in VR. So that means that you have to hold them still, you're on a timer, and you have to delicately manipulate the piece of kit on them while they're staring at you, while they're panicking, while they're crying, while they're telling you about their children, while they're telling you about this and whatever. The impact on you, your stress levels is phenomenal. But it's also a way that you have this sort of first person storytelling. They're telling you all about themselves. They're telling you about their family, their background. It's not generic box. So while you're doing something quite precise, you're getting this emotional overload. And that's where I think some of the storytelling might go in the future.
I'm going to make that game. That game sounds fascinating. I think bringing the sense of urgency, and you can imagine character development, especially with tools like InWorld that allows generative AI to write the characters'
Exactly.
Narration and dialogue. It ups the game. I mean, we already see games like shell games from I Expect You to Die, a bomb as a mechanic. But now adding a real person, I don't know why they didn't think of that, or maybe they did. Maybe it was too stressful, and that game is supposed to be more fun and casual.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a fascinating game. What other recommendations, especially if you're an indie developer? Because Adrian, you have such a wealth of experience building AAA blockbuster games. What advice do you have for the indie game developer that's thinking about developing for XR today? What are the steps?
I think before every blockbuster, there's a small buster. I don't know how you say it. There's a starting point. A Just Dance became a blockbuster over the years, but at first it was 5 guys who didn't know how to dance in a room making a dance game dancing to Britney Spears. That's, who would have thought. I think one of the big things is iteration. You've got to iterate. I think you've got to try and try and try and try. You don't really know what game you're making in the beginning. A lot of it is that you can do your PowerPoint, you can do the story and what have you, and look at all the market and the KPIs, but you have to be ready to evolve. You have to be ready to constantly iterate and transform that game. You're going to hit walls. And that's what I always say, get ready to fail, because that's what it is. You're going to fail. You're going to fail again. You're going to fail again. You're going to fail again. And even when you've kind of succeeded, you're kind of failing, and you're not going to be happy with it. So you're going to do more, and you're always going to want to have done something extra and more. So you just got to be comfortable in that space. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson working in games for 30 years or whatever that you get. It's that's the fun bit. learn to enjoy that bit, because that's the fun bit. It's kind of, you're constantly finding solutions and working through a problem, that, especially when you're on new stuff. It's one thing when you do an iteration of a game, it's a little bit different. You have that time to sort of polish and do what you want to do, I think. But I always find, I only work on sort of three sequels max. It's just a personal thing. I like to change and do something different. That's just my personal preference, because I think when you're doing sequels, you can get lazy. It's easier. You're just adding. Whereas I love looking at that big abyss and not knowing where, just jumping in and not knowing where it's going to take me. And I think that's what VR was that. I think AI is that to a certain extent. I think Vision Pro and mixed reality is that going forward. And I think when you're working in that, that's the cool bit. That's the fun bit. So get ready to fail is my advice.
That's great advice. We talked about this previously regarding game development in the game development process. I think in terms of the history of game development, there was a lot of time with smaller teams, but a lot of iterations, a lot of prototyping, a lot of trying to find that magic. You mentioned KPIs. How do you think KPIs and the way games are developed today to reach a bigger mass audience or have bigger expectations, how has game development has changed, in your opinion, in the last 10 years?
I think mobiles change that a lot. There's a much faster cycle, and you get data very quickly. So people are very quick to iterate on mobile. So I think that's happened. I think AAA games is we live in a sequence. We live in a sequel world, and it's very, you're on version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 iterations. So I guess when you're doing a sequel, KPIs can help. When you're doing a live game, particularly, it helps you to iterate. Like if you're doing a shooter or something like that, it allows you to tweak stuff, balance stuff. So on that side, I think KPIs and understanding what players are doing is great. I think when you're talking about innovation, I think it's dangerous. I'll be brutally honest. It's a very personal opinion, but I think KPIs are one of those things. Is like, how do you know what you're going? How does the KPI know what you're going to do in the future? It doesn't. You don't know. And I don't know if I told you this story, but somebody told me a story. I don't know how true it is, about NASA, where their lack of innovation. They started removing KPIs from their innovation department because they were saying that it was holding them back. It was always like, well, you have to prove it with a KPI, and it's like, well, I haven't done it yet, so I'm already stuck because I can't. How can I prove something that I haven't made yet? And I think we've seen this in the industry, and it's probably one of the things that's always made sort of Ubisoft great is that they've sometimes just trusted instinct. They've just tried it. It's what's allowed them to create some of those franchises. Because look, and I always give Just Dance as a great example. The dance market was next to nothing. There was Dance Dance Revolution. All these games had sort of lived their life cycle. The dance was sort of dead, and everyone was like, a dance game? It's never going to work. The thing was number one for like 30 weeks. It was a handful of developers that made it. But had we only listened to KPIs, you would have never even tried. And I think even the people and I think it's also inspiring for people to believe in things that we don't know yet. I think that's inspiring. I think that motivates you to try. That doesn't mean you don't use the KPIs to have an educated, that increases your opportunity. It's an educated guess. At the end of the day, we're guessing to a certain extent. But I think relying too heavily on it has seen a lot of the bigger players, a lot of the data-driven companies lack innovation. They've struggled. How true it is, I couldn't tell you. But Google, when they came into the games market, their KPIs all the time, data. Really, they should have blown away the games market. They should have won everything. Maybe data's not the only answer, and it's not because they don't have the talent. It's not because they don't have the money, and it's that they have some of the brightest people I've ever met. I mean, when you sit with the Google guys, you're kind of like, you just feel a bit dumb most of the day. It's like same with the Meta guys. Sometimes you just you guys are just really smart, man. but are they able to be innovative and express and try things that there is no answer to yet? Maybe they're not. Maybe taking risks on things we don't know and having those little surprises is worth a try. But that's maybe that's an old man talking. Who knows?
I couldn't agree more. That's a really astute observation. I think companies like Meta, especially the failure of Stadia, they have all the data. They have a keen understanding who that customer is and what that customer wants. But I think what you had mentioned was very fascinating in the sense that their way that they build their company and around data is not the same to make art and to make games. And I think
Exactly.
that's a big equation. To make art, there is a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of emotion. Literally, there's arguments going through
Yeah.
game design reviews.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's also missing when you look at how technology is built. How do you think we can address that better as an industry?
I think there's there's amount of friction within. I think you said it very well when you're creating art. I think there is that natural friction. I think you need a little bit of friction. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that makes you better. It makes you stronger. It just makes it brings a different energy to development. I think we've a lot of companies, and over the years, the industrialization of video games is not necessarily a way to innovate. It doesn't mean that games haven't progressed and got better. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we should also be careful is that we want to stay fresh, because if you look at the movie industry, they went through that cycle, and they kind of lost their way. Netflix came along, boom. So you want to be aware. I mean, one of the ones that I look at a lot, because I kind of they fascinate me in terms of, that you've heard of them coming into video games, but if you look at how they value creative within their series, it's interesting. It's like, they really try from different countries, from different avenues, from different languages, from whatever. They give and they finance projects, and they're constantly trying to find the art in their content. And I think that's an interesting way that they approach it. I think for us in the industry as a whole, I think having small pockets, smaller teams, because don't forget, teams have grown exponentially. You're talking about 600-700 teams. If I put you in a room with 600 or 700 people, try and lead them, try and guide them through a vision. Go on, I dare you. Unless you're the head of, like, I don't know, the Marines or something, or maybe, and even then, it becomes a mob. It becomes a mob, so you lose a lot of your agility. And people, and a lot of the things that I found breakthroughs in games over the years has come from one person that no one knows his name or her name. They don't know who it is. The lighting in Splinter Cell, for example, you probably couldn't tell me who actually did it. The icon in Just Dance that comes from the right to left, you don't know their name. And that's what made it what it was. Those little things that we talked about earlier, a lot of the time, that little secret thing, that little secret ingredient was done by someone within the team who just had a crazy idea when they went home that night and programmed it in like 2 minutes. Came back and went like, "Oh, can I try it?" I think we should never forget that. I think in the bigger teams, it becomes very, very heavy to add that little piece of magic, which before we didn't have that problem, or not as much. It's always a problem with different times, but it's on a bigger scale. Everything's a bigger scale. There's much more risk with scale now. When you've got 600-700 people, you're in a different problem. It's not the same one. And I think Ubisoft's good. They've always been very, and I think that's because it's still run a certain way. And I think I won't speak for Eve, but the way he's run the company over the years is a family business, and they've come from distribution, and they've worked in different things. I think he's always managed to balance innovation and allow teams to experiment. He's always had this experimental. He's still a dreamer, if you will. So he's willing to try things that maybe no one else agrees with, and he'll try it and just to see and things like that. And I think that's helped Ubisoft last as long as they have, definitely. But I'd like to see everyone be more like that. I think it's the right way.
I couldn't agree more. The VR report is also a time capsule that I try to capture what the current landscape is of virtual reality. Adrian, what are your predictions for the next 2 years? What are your next predictions for 5 years? I think that's as far as we can go right now.
Ha ha ha. I think there will be a convergence of MR and VR. I think headsets it'll be one in the same. I don't think there are two. I think there'll be one. And I think pass-through technology will continue to improve exponentially. I think the level of pass-through is the critical point. What I can switch on and switch off quickly is a friction point. I think hand tracking, avatar expression, embodiment, facial expression, and the business use cases of that, your digital workspace will continue to expand very quickly over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. I think us doing this in a virtual space with expressive avatars is not a million miles away. And I think we'll probably be, once they solve the recording side of that, I think those will be the evolutions that will happen, where you can record an interview in a virtual space very easily. I think holograms are going to show up. I don't know why. I've got a feeling hologram technology will pop up. So that which will have a knock-on effect on mixed reality. I think they're going to find, I don't know why. I just keep waking up in cold sweats thinking of holograms. So I don't know if I've just gone mad. I think the spatial computing, that Minority Report vision, I think Apple will find a way, from an entertainment point of view, from a music mixing point of view, from that side of things, to make it very, very fluid and interesting. I think they're the ones who are going to break through that first big hurdle of interactivity within music, film, and shows within their ecosystem, because they've got the devices. Everything's connected. And I think once you connect your hands, your watch, your heart rate, your eyes, you can do it. You've got everything. You've got all the data inputs. So it's all about inputs. I think feedback in VR, I'm going to talk for ages now. I think feedback in VR, one of the things that I think people haven't experienced yet, which I was fortunate enough to see early on, you can actually, in VR, you can actually create the sensation of weight. So I can push an object and make it you feel as though it's heavier than it is. It's tricks. But I think those explorations are going to happen more and more. I think it's still a bit basic. I even don't think it's evolved as much as it could have. But I think, once you start feeling weight, that immersion increases and people start getting high. I think, of course, AI will impact it phenomenally. I think it's a power thing. Things come faster as you can build things quicker. And I think the creator economy within VR I look at sort of 10-year-olds today, what they're going to be doing in VR in 10 years. I don't think we can even imagine in terms of what they're creating. They'll be creating and painting their virtual spaces and then just giving them to you. And I think that will be a real thing. And they'll own it. You'll be visiting their digital space and you'll be paying for it. So that's about it. And there's many, many more things. There's many, many more things.
Well, I think it's Adrian, I've known you for decades. Your curiosity, your creativity, and just your raw work ethic, I've always envied. And I really appreciate this conversation. Anything you want to plug or how people can find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always available. If you've got any questions, feel free. But yeah, no, there's nothing really, if anyone wants, even particularly indies, if there's indies out there who just want to talk to someone, have a sounding board, feel free. If there's new developers out there that are trying new stuff, I'm always happy to help. That's what I'm here for. I love sharing the lessons that I've learned. So not a problem. Hit me up.
Fantastic. Well, get ready for the herd. Adrian, thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have a cooler week. I hope the temperature cools down a little bit. And I really appreciate you, man.
It's lovely to see you, David. Glad you're doing this. It's cool, man. Love it.